Hello everyone. Welcome to the third webinar of Colliers series of Colliers Baltics, hosted by Colliers Baltics team. This time we are covering the update on COVID-19 impact to industrial and logistics market. So my name is Riga. I'm a partner and head of industrial and of logistics at Colliers Lithuania, and I will hold this webinar together with my dear colleague Kaspars Gražulis, Associate Director from Industrial and Logistics team in Colliers, Latvia. So,
hey everybody.
Quick reminder, as some of you might already seen, the webinar is being recorded, so it will be available in our LinkedIn, Colliers International LinkedIn page, as well as Brel Forum YouTube channel. So make sure you follow us on both of these platforms, and in case you want to share it afterwards with someone else, you'll have a chance. Also, we do encourage to use the question and answer section to raise questions, and we will definitely leave some time after the webinar to answer all of them, all of the ones that were not covered during the webinar. So it will take about 30 minutes, divided into two parts, by Kaspars analyzing the changes in the supply market, and I will be sharing our understanding of what's current demand situation in the market, what's tenant behavior, and what are the main driving forces in the market at the moment. So before giving stage to Kaspar, I have to confess, we are not, during this webinar, we are not going to give you the answers of what is coming, because we simply don't know. But the intention of all this effort is that we think that it should be really useful for you to hear about the picture that we see when communicating to many of you during these uncertain times, as well as with other market participants, and as well involving some insights from our colleagues from neighboring markets. So, Kaspar, the stage is yours, please.
Thanks, Reggie. So yeah, thanks for the welcome. Thanks everybody for joining. I hope you hear me loud and clear, and we can start. So yeah, as Reggie mentioned, I will be covering supply side. I will talk briefly a little bit about what's happening with the pipeline, how it is affected by COVID crisis. We will touch a little bit Colliers questionnaire we did a couple of weeks ago, and we'll try to answer one of the main questions that have been popping up to us and probably in everybody's minds about the rents, about the discounts, and we'll finalize with some conclusions and look at some trends that could be coming up. Are they true or are they false? So yeah, before going into details about the supply, let's see where we stand at the moment. So here you can see what's the current situation as of today. So as of today, we have total stock at around 4 million square meters under the roof in Baltics. That's divided in 5 cities. If you look at Estonia, we have Tallinn here in Tallinn region. If you're looking at Latvia, we have Riga and Riga region. And if we're looking at Lithuania, so these are 3 cities combined. It's Vilnius, Kaunas, and Klaipėda. And next to it, you can see the distribution of the vacancy between all of these 5 cities. So basically, the situation has been steady for a while now, with Tallinn up front, with the highest vacancy, and Klaipėda, due to low supply, at the lowest level. For Vilnius, for Riga, has been steady, between 2 to 3% of the vacancy for a couple of months already, I would say for a year already. When looking at supply, we divided it in 2 parts, basically looking at pipeline under construction and looking at pipeline under planning. And what we try to do, we try to compare what was the situation actually in the beginning of the year, and what is the situation at the moment when we are already in the 2nd month of COVID pandemic. So here, what you can see is actually the pipeline of projects under construction and volumes in the beginning of the year without the projects that are already handed over or finalized. And as you can see that basically in Riga, and what we mentioned in the beginning of the year, that in Riga this is a record-breaking year. We have almost 200,000 square meters under construction at the moment, equally distributed between two segments, speculative and build-to-suit. And if we are mentioning build-to-suit, then basically that consists of two big projects that are under construction. That's Lidl and Rimi distribution centers, which is more than 40,000 square meters of construction each. If looking at Lithuania, so this is again distributed between three cities, and we see pipeline of projects under construction more than 100,000 square meters. And if looking at Lithuanian market, then basically projects under construction, they are mainly between 10,000 to 20,000 square meters each, biggest of which being project done in Klaipėda by Vantana. And looking at Tallinn, looking at Estonia, and then basically the pipeline of projects under construction are smaller as well as their sizes. So all the projects that are under construction are below 10,000 square meters each, and those are more or less stock office type development projects. If looking at nowadays and looking at situation at the moment, then basically we can see that there has not been large impact to the projects that are under construction. So basically the construction continues as long as it's legally possible and safe. If we look at EMEA region, if we look at overall in Europe, then basically we had some cases, for example, in France, in Italy, in Spain, where construction was actually suspended due to safety reasons. But if looking at Baltics, then we didn't see such thing, and that's why I would say we don't see any big impact on pipeline under construction. So the volumes, they more or less stay the same, with one exception in Latvia, in Riga, where in the beginning of COVID pandemics, one of the speculative projects that was started in the initial construction stage was reduced by half of its size, but still the construction continues. If moving forward to projects that are under planning at the moment, and here you can see the pipeline as it was in the beginning of the year. Again, we can see that Riga region is up front with a little bit less than 300,000 square meters under planning. And sure, we see that actually the impact is quite visible if we compare those volumes with the situation that's happening now. And if you see that basically in all three Baltic states, in almost all segments, there has been decrease of volumes under planning. If we're looking at Estonian market, then basically the difference is the least visible at the moment. But overall, in Tallinn, some speculative developments, as we see, will be carefully evaluated. Thus, nobody admits that today loudly, but we can expect some changes there. But if we look at Latvia and Lithuania, then we see rather big difference in pipeline of projects under planning. And if you look closer to the numbers, then basically the biggest hit and the biggest decrease was for projects that are actually built to suit or built to own projects. And we see that during pandemic, tenants, they are evaluating their expansion plans. And basically we see that actually, as long as state of emergency status will be active, tenants do not want to make decisions to go further with build-to-suit development. Of course, if we're looking at projects under planning, then several projects. They are divided into stages, and actually the next stage development depends on the take-up and on the lease activity, as well as more developments with speculative development will be waiting for pre-leases to actually start the construction. Well, overall, due to tenant stall, there is still uncertain time for speculative development. And in the beginning, actually in Europe, we saw that large developers, they put on hold a bit some speculative development plans, but nevertheless, they are evaluating those plans, and we see that in the future, some selective speculative development could be happening, and all, let's say, development plans for speculative development will be evaluated, taking into account demand in the region, taking into account location. And overall, we see that sentiment for developers looking at speculative development is rather optimistic. And nevertheless, this investment and this speculative development goes into next year investment market. And there could be also some opportunities, meaning the construction costs at the moment could be decreased and there could be some gain, as well as potential increase of demand during the recovery after COVID. And what we saw that actually investment perspective for industrial asset class could be increasing, since overall industrial sector was least affected by COVID comparing to let's say retail to office segment. And we can see that there could be some opportunities for investors, for developers, in terms of development connected with e-commerce, connected to last mile delivery, connected to terminal spaces. And if you look at Baltics, then this actually had been going for a while now. We see that there's lack of such type of premises, and this could be an opportunity. Moving forward, some weeks ago, Colliers conducted a survey in all 3 Baltic countries, where companies involved in the survey occupy or own more than 800,000 square meters of industrial space. And one of the questions we are asking was, how do you see the rental levels in upcoming 12 months? And basically, as you see here, is the result of the survey. Tenants look more on the rent levels to be declining. On the other hand, landlords see that the rent could be stable and some kind of investment incentive structure could be evaluated. And this is one of the questions actually I have received a lot during last couple of weeks, both from the tenants and from the landlords. So what's happening with the rents? What's happening with the commercial terms? Are there any discounts applied? And how should we act both from the tenant's side and from the landlord's side? And this is actually what tenants have been asking during this time. And we have heard several cases that actually, as soon as state of emergency status was issued, the next day landlord received a letter from the tenant with a request to reduce the rent. But then again, we see that tenants are using the situation in their behalf and trying to reduce the rent. But nevertheless, each tenant is evaluating their own business, and both there are requests coming in as well as there are none. And if asking to the landlord, so will you give me a discount? Will you give me any deferrals from the rent? So first answer absolutely is no. And actually this is answer several tenants have received from their landlords throughout the Baltics, and there are several landlords that keep this strategy. But nevertheless, landlord sentiment tends to be sympathetic, and landlords are fully or partially responding positively to tenants' requests. Nevertheless, each of the cases is evaluated separately. And what was my surprise when conducting this survey, that actually several tenants are giving the discounts in different amounts depending on the current situation with the tenant. So each tenant is deeply evaluated, but the surprise was that discounts and incentives are being given without asking anything back. But if we are looking from a landlord's perspective and actually what could be improved from landlord's side and how could be this situation with tenant requests used from landlord's perspective, and actually this is, first of all, it's an opportunity to extend the lease term, and secondly, of course, the discounted amount or deferred time of the lease could be amortized in amount of discount in the remaining lease term. So yeah, and to sum it up, here are some trends that we saw coming. The question is, are they happening, are they staying, and are they true? So first of all, in the beginning of the COVID, we saw that there could be some shift from speculative to build-to-suit development. But actually, this turns out to be false. And if you saw the beginning, the charts we showed of projects under planning and under construction, so basically speculative development will stay. It will be more selective, and we will see more and more potential pre-leases required for speculative development to start. And this is some shift that has been going actually when this construction wave starting from 2014 initiated, basically comparing to previous crisis in 2008, where speculative development were pretty active. Now, not all developers are ready to go speculatively, but still we don't see the clear shift from speculative to build-to-suit will be permanent, and speculative development will continue. Secondly, so this is something we talked about in the beginning of the year, and we saw that due to large-scale speculative developments, due to large-scale build-to-suit developments, there could be some vacancy increase expected at the end of the year, as well as in the beginning of next year. And this could lead to the shift of market from landlords to tenants market. And basically, as on different cases, not only connected to commercial real estate, for this trend, COVID has given a fast track access, and actually this trend is moving even further away, and this could be happening even faster than end of the year. And the last but not least, actually this could be a right time for tenants to get a good lease contract. And actually I want to finish my part with the words of one developer. I heard that nevertheless the tenants are pausing, there's a stall. Actually, this is Christmas time for the tenants, and if Christmas time, then Christmas discounts could be provided, and we are here in Colliers definitely to help you succeed that. So thanks everybody, and I give floor to my colleague Regimantas. Reggie, do you hear me?
Thanks, Kaspars. I was listening. Thanks a lot. It was nice and clear and short. Now I'll share my screen. Hold on a second. So thanks to you. I'm pleased to tell that we already are being listened to by 69 participants. So thank you for growing this number up to almost 70. So now I'm going to walk you all pretty quickly through the demand situation in the current market, as well as I mentioned before, tenant behavior.
Reggie, just a second. I wanted to remind everybody that you can see on below there's a question answer module, so you can use that to ask questions to us, and we'll be happy to answer them at the end of the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Kaspars. And we actually received one question. I asked just to clarify it a bit, Elena. And besides these questions, we'll take additional that we have received already before when registering to this webinar. So feel free, and we one more time encourage ask the questions. So now, before going to current situation, I want to very quickly walk you through the recent good times, what was happening in the how the demand and how the market looked really recently. So you in front of the screen you see the industrial and logistics occupier conditions map for the end of 2019. It's conducted every half of the year, and basically what it shows it's either the market is tenant friendly or tenant favorable, is it neutral or landlord favorable. So what we actually see really very few tenant favorable markets throughout the whole region. It's below 20% of them, whereas almost half, or actually about 40% of the locations are pretty neutral. And what else we see that much more, and like 3 times more than tenant favorable markets were landlord favorable, and this was due to actually due to 2 main reasons. So one, and in many cases it was most important, that due to very high demand in that particular market. The other one, for some of the location, was that the development was really slow. So, but all in all, what we can see that really recently, besides moving a bit towards tenant-friendly market in general, we were in very landlord-dominating market, and landlord were having a bit better bargaining power. Now moving a bit closer to now, and I'll show you a couple of graphs. One of them you already saw in Kaspars' presentation, but my intention is to show you how the businesses, and probably some of you were looking at the current situation and the future 4 weeks ago. It was the beginning of the pandemic situation. We were in 2 weeks of that, and basically what the businesses that were participating in the survey showed us that, or told us that more than 60% of them expected for the demand in the market for the space to decline in the coming 12 months. And as Kaspars already mentioned, half of them were also believing that headline rents will go down or decrease in the coming 12 months or 1 year. Another thing that thinking about future impact and how will it impact how the businesses believe that the upcoming future will impact their daily operations, is that almost half of the businesses were already seeing at that moment increase in storage capacity and ongoing supply shortages, and actually more than 80% of the companies were already expecting the delays in the flow of the goods in the upcoming 12 months, as well as the restriction of the supply chains. So that was the mood 4 weeks ago. You probably remember that it was those first 2 weeks were really full of struggle and rather emotional. And now I'm going further to current situation, which is 4 weeks behind, and I think we probably all believe that we are at the better end towards the lockdown. So now the table that you see, it provides the soft information or summarized opinion of the teams of the Colliers Baltic team about current market situation and how companies are acting at the moment. As well, we are including several neighbor markets which are important to us, or we can relate to them, this is insights from our colleagues cooperating and communicating with their clients in those markets. So we included Poland, Sweden, and Denmark. So first of all, it's no big secret what we see that businesses basically currently operate at the presumed hypothetical number of 30-40% of the pre-COVID activities. Compared to Poland, Sweden, Denmark, so we basically see that in all of the markets have suffered pretty heavily towards this pandemic, and in the majority of them where the lockdown and the strict lockdown measures were applied, and so it's a bit better in Poland, Sweden, and then Denmark compared to the Baltics, and we will shortly see what's behind that. So first of all, first thing that to talk about is ongoing pre-COVID transactions. So basically what we see now, it's almost 4/5 or 2/3 of the transactions that were initiated before the COVID and were ongoing, that they were canceled, or they were postponed actually, and some of them even canceled by one of the parties, most likely by the tenant parts in Lithuania. Whereas a bit better situation was noticed in Poland and Sweden, and slightly better compared to Lithuania was noticed in Denmark. So the numbers are relatively similar, a bit better compared in those bigger markets with bigger internal economies. What else? Another very important part that's impacting current market activity is new requests for the space at the moment. So basically what we see, and what all the markets noticed, is that for 2-3 weeks at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was pretty much at the same time for all of the markets, in mid-March, the markets got frozen. So for 2-3 weeks it was basically doing nothing towards ongoing transactions, towards some new instructions. And even to date, the majority of the markets are seeing basically no or really small interest and a new request for the space. It applies to the Baltics. It applies to actually to the Poland. Applies to the Denmark. In a bit different situation is in Sweden, where we noticed that like for last 2 weeks, the situation is already like new requests are already accelerating, and some transactions being happening, like new transactions in e-commerce, e-groceries segments. Now, when looking about the demand generating sectors that are generating the demand at the moment, I would say for the Baltics, it's a bit of surprise that we see production here, but basically it's not some optimistic expansion plans. More likely it's some matured needs to grow or to relocate, as well as not being involved in some disrupted supply chains. And as well, for majority actually of the cases, the export markets are Scandinavia. Then it's local distribution, fast-moving consumer goods, last-mile logistics, which is pretty understandable at the moment. On the other, for all the other larger markets, we see, and there's no surprise, e-commerce, which was the major force before, it's still one of the major force. We don't know why. I think we all personally put some input into that for buying something online and so on and so forth. So what else to move forward? I'm trying to keep our time, our webinar in time. So when talking about dominating rent level expectations, so besides we showed you the survey results that were conducted 4 weeks ago, when half of the participants expected that the prices will go down. We see for the Baltics, we see that the current expectations are pretty stable, maybe with a slight decrease. So going to, as Kasper already mentioned, going towards some opportunities to score a bit better conditions, but it doesn't apply to all of the cases. But what's pretty solid in all the larger markets, which are driven by strong growth of e-commerce, e-groceries, and all other related sectors, actually there's no expectation of the prices to go down. Yes, the development will slow down a little bit. There will be less speculative development, and that's how the market is going to balance itself. One more thing, just to understand, and to probably interesting to hear more for many of you, is that actually from the tenant side, usage that the support from the landlords is very modest, and it's basically in all of the markets. Despite some cases, as Kasper mentioned before, when some of the landlords agree on some initiatives to help the client to go through these hard times, in general, the majority of them are providing either some rent deferrals or grace periods and extending additional lease periods. And by the end of the day, the majority of the clients of the tenants are not using that because they actually don't need. There are a lot of and there still are a lot of requests of trying to use cover to guard their cash flow and cost, but in general the logistics market is not really strong impacted compared to other sectors, what we see in retail and others. So talking about the trends and what's in it for us. So what we have, it's pretty similar for all of the markets. We have witnessed some short-term leases, but the wave of them is already over. It was mainly driven by some parcel deliveries and some stock, some inventory piling due to closed end markets from the production companies, but now it's pretty much stabilized, and we don't see this growing anymore. E-commerce, definitely, it's still one of the strongest wave, the strongest power in the majority of the markets. Here in Lithuania, while we saw the activity levels in e-commerce in general soaring, and especially e-groceries, the volumes are rising really quickly, but that actually for the short term will not do strong impact to the local market, to the Baltic market, because the majority of the main players are in many cases using their existing infrastructure, pickup points from the stores, and so on and so forth. And for the e-commerce in general, they are still using the same warehouses and maybe expanding, slightly expanding for these short-term activities. But for the longer run, definitely that's one of the trend, because it got much more users to many e-commerce and especially groceries, grocery channels. So now we predict that the volumes will grow. Another thing which is probably really strong opportunity for the Baltics is that despite the fact that we already being noticed by many big international companies as production companies for setting up one more manufacturing facility for either Lithuania, Latvia, or Estonia, with all this disruption of the supply chain and with all these lean supply chains that are now being impacted and facing really big struggles, we definitely see that there's an opportunity for the region, and we expect the amount of the requests to consider Lithuania as another manufacturing location to grow. Larger warehouses for inventory in short term. It probably won't be big. It won't show big impact, but for the longer run, related to the disruption and the diversification of the supply chain, I think that it will. We will see that that both the production companies and some logistics companies, they will grow their warehouses just for diversifying and having more stock available on the side. This is all similar to, this is all related to production build-to-suit projects that we already start noticing some of them, and probably this trend will grow even stronger because the more visible we will be on the map as a manufacturing location, the more of them of those requests are being likely to be converted to some build-to-suit projects rather than just owning this real property. And local distribution, last mile delivers. This is active at the moment. We all meet the courier of one of the delivery companies probably once or twice a week, maybe even earlier. But yet it will grow. There will be some distribution centers there and parcel delivery centers, but in general the impact is not going to be that big due to the overall volumes or size need for space in this segment. So that's about it from my part. I actually thank you for listening, and we just want to take a look what are the questions we see. There was one question which is actually now removed.
So the questions that are coming in, and I saw several similar questions, was regarding potential new production company entrance to Baltics market, both from Europe and as well as from Asia. And the question is, do we see such kind of trend happening? The companies are entering Baltics market, actually, I can share one example. We closed a lease transaction 1 month ago from one Irish company. We started working last year. At the end of the last year, they had 2 production units, one in China and one in Ireland. And the question was to relocate Dublin factory to Latvia and keep Chinese factory. So this seemed to be a long-term project in the beginning, but as soon as China was closed in January, so basically the company needed to open the production in Latvia as soon as possible and to shift some of the operations from China to Latvia. And actually last month we succeeded and we opened the production here in Latvia, in Adaži. So that's a success story during actually COVID crisis of relocation of production company to Baltics.
Yeah, so basically, just to add up to Kasper, I think I slightly touched this topic during my part of the presentation. And so it's definitely for sure that we will see more. We already see them, and the amount of the newcomer, the requests and interest in the region is due to a good cost and quality ratio and infrastructure and some other factors. It's already growing, and it's pretty significantly growing. So all this backshoring and this diversification of the production sites and the locations, it definitely will give positive impact to the Baltics. What else? One more question I see is one of our participants asked to for the long-term forecast, both from me and Kasper, from 2 to 5 to 10 years. So I would say, it's really hard, and we are the witness that it's really hard to predict the future, even in a 6-month period, because probably not that many of us expected that we will face something like this pandemic situation we are at the moment. So basically, I would say it's our opinion and opinion of many market participants. The industrial and logistics segment is one of the strongest and strongest in the among other real estate sectors, and understanding that the supply chains and the warehouse and production space will due to all this diversification of the supply chains will the importance of it will grow even more. So we expect that with probably a short-term struggle, maybe till the end of 2020, we are going to see a rebound and getting to some normal life, which was before and which is going to be in the upcoming future.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, so just to supplement what Reggie mentioned, and also what we see, and during this time of COVID crisis, we see that e-commerce is rapidly developing throughout the Europe. But unfortunately, in Baltics, we do not have such strong e-commerce. We do not have such strong e-commerce hubs located here. So basically, what we can focus on and what have been developing, and what I mentioned, is this last mile delivery, parcel delivery services that have been growing, and of course the turbulence in that segment will definitely increase, and that would be the sector to focus on. And here we can see a huge increase in e-commerce in general. I personally don't see that happening.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay. So I think that's the end of our webinar. We try to finish that more or less on time. So thank you, Kasper, for being participating here, and thanks for everybody for listening. And as I mentioned before, you'll be able to find the video in the Colliers International LinkedIn page and Brill Forum YouTube channel. So make sure you follow us, and you can share it with your someone else.
So thanks everybody, and if there are some questions that are unanswered, feel free to contact us directly, and we'll be as much help as possible.
Okay, thank you, and have a good day, everyone.
Have a nice day. Bye.